Vitalik Buterin posted an essay on what he believes is the future endgame of Ethereum. This essay was so popular that it literally crashed his entire website that he had to post it again. Vitalik is, in my opinion, one of the best thinkers in the entire cryptocurrency space. And anytime he writes about something, especially something like this that talks about the future of Ethereum, it makes sense to pay attention to him. Vitalik, however, has what I call big brain energy. So this means that because he's such a super smart and such a well-read guy, a lot of times he'll say something that, I have to read maybe once, twice, maybe even 3 times to even understand like 50% of what it's saying. So what I did was I took this endgame essay and I summarized it in the form of a blog post, basically kind of simplifying the key concepts in there, talking about the big ideas and what it means for those of us who are interested in the future of Ethereum and cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. And so if you want, I'm going to put the link to the description and all this stuff, and you can follow along with all the links. But what I'm going to do is I also made a Twitter thread, so I'm going to kind of go through the Twitter thread to kind of basically break down this core concept to help you understand what Vitalik is saying. So basically, the endgame of Ethereum can basically be summarized like this, which basically means centralized production, decentralized validation, and strong anti-censorship protection. So essentially what this means is that in the future, you would have Ethereum as layer 1, which we all know, but then a lot of the activity would be happening on layer 2s. So this can be your polygons, your optimisms, things like that. This makes a lot of people are not happy about this because they don't want like any type of centralization. But then I think the key point he was just trying to make here was that it's not a perfect world. You do have to make trade-offs, and essentially the trade-off here is that yes, production is centralized in the sense of the nodes that would be mining the blocks would basically be, you would have fewer nodes with higher hardware requirements, but the validation would still be decentralized and you would still have censorship protection. And he sort of shows that if we use Ethereum with rollups, even if one rollup dominates or we have many rollups, you still end up at the same fundamental endgame. And even with the traditional big blockchain, you still end up at the same point. So first of all, what is the fundamental problem that he's trying to solve? So to understand this, we have to go back to a blog post Vitalik wrote a couple years back. I think this is in 2021, where he talks about the scalability trilemma. And essentially the scalability trilemma basically means that when you have a blockchain, it can either be decentralized, secure, or scalable, and you can have 3 of those options. So for example, something like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're very secure, they're very decentralized, but they're not scalable. And here we can say scalable basically means high transaction costs, or slow, high transaction fees, so high gas fees, and slow transaction times. Whereas maybe something like, for example, you could have like a Solana, you could have maybe your Binance Smart Chain, that they're very scalable, so they're super fast, they have low gas fees, relatively secure, but they're not as decentralized. And so it's very hard to get all 3 of these options. So essentially what Vitalik is trying to say here is that, or at least what I think he's trying to say is, how can we get both? How can we both have the decentralized and secure properties we all want, but also the scalability benefits as well, so we're not paying a lot of money in gas fees and transactions aren't taking a long time? What does decentralized enough mean? Right? So we want decentralization. How do we know something is sufficiently decentralized? And then for that, we'll come to this essay he wrote in 2021. And basically, in this essay, he has a title that's literally called "It's Crucial for Blockchain Decentralization for Regular Users to be Able to Run a Node." So essentially what this is saying is that a system is decentralized when every single node, not every single, but like the average laptop is able to run a node and basically validate transactions and make sure that nothing spooky or fraud is happening. And one thing about Vitalik that you have to give him a lot of credit for is that he's been very, very consistent about this decentralized, democratized aspect of Ethereum, right? Basically the whole thing about where anyone can run, and when I say anyone, I don't literally mean anyone, but anyone with a reasonably modern laptop is able to run a node and validate it. And one of my favorite threads of all time is this story that Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX tells about why he was, how he was talking about basically comparing Ethereum to Solana. And he was saying that one of the things about Solana is that in order for you to run a Solana node, one of the reasons why it's so fast is because you need a lot of hardware requirements to be able to run a node. And that's why it's so fast. But with Ethereum, almost anyone can run a node. And so essentially that's one of the big things he kept on talking about, is that if you want something to be truly decentralized, then you need to make it so that almost everyone can have a say in making sure things are running properly. So next we talk about the roadmap. So in this endgame essay, he brings up a roadmap he has. And then so now this is where things get a little bit more technical, and now he's talking about how can we sort of get to this roll-up world. We can basically use a second tier staking. So basically, you don't need you don't need as powerful of a laptop to be a validator. You can use fraud proofs. You can use ZK snarks, data availability sampling, secondary transaction channels. A lot of this stuff gets pretty technical. One thing maybe I will explain a bit more is the data availability sampling. From what I understand, is that basically you validating a node without sending like a full transaction. So for those of you who aren't familiar with like Web 2 concepts, this is what I think it means is that like when you want to see if a website is up and running, you don't necessarily need to send like a full HTTP GET request. You can just send a head request or an options request to see if the website is live. So now we consider another possible long-term future of rollups where you have systems like Arbitrum, Optimism, ZK Sync, Starknet that are doing 10,000 transactions per second with the right hardware. Then now also imagine that Ethereum is also implementing sharding and data availability sampling. And so this is the crux of what he's saying, is that you would then have a world in which your roll-ups, so your ZK Syncs, your Arbitrums, they're a bit more centralized in their block production, but they're secured by the underlying layer 1 chain, which basically allows you to still have centralized block production, but then decentralized validation secured by the layer 2 chains, and then the other techniques he mentioned earlier on. And then so if you have a world in which you have Arbitrums, you have your ZK Syncs doing 10,000 transactions secured by the underlying layer 1, now you can have both your decentralization and scalability cake. Perfect, right? Not quite. So then he basically talks about this paper, or I'm not sure if he talked about it, I just Googled it later on, but the idea behind this paper is that imagine you have a marketplace, and again, this now is when I'm hypothesizing what I think it means. I only read the abstract. But essentially, the idea here would be that imagine you have different exchanges, right? So now imagine you have the New York Stock Exchange, you have the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange. But instead of that, you have Ethereum Stock Exchange, you have ZK Sync, Arbitrum, Optimism, etc. There is actually a way for you to find arbitrage opportunities as you bridge between the different blockchains. So, for example, let's say you take ETH on the layer 1, you convert it to Polygon, you convert it to Binance Smart Chain, and you do all. And then in the process of you moving these different currencies between different chains, you can actually find mispricing in the same asset, and then you can basically find arbitrage opportunities. And then I'm not sure if he mentioned. Yeah, he did actually mention this in his essay. In his essay, he mentions this pretty cool tool by Western Gate, by a research company called Semiotic AI. And essentially what this shows you is how you can basically find arbitrage opportunities bridging between different chains. So for example here, if you go from, you can see here, if you basically start up with wrapped ETH on Ethereum, convert it to Terra, I believe, convert it to Tether, bridge it over to Polygon, and then swap it again back to wrapped ETH on the Polygon chain, you can basically make about $13 per unit, I believe. Right, and then if you now scale this up, you can make huge opportunities. And then so if you just basically all this thing does is just basically find different arbitrage opportunities. So you will see that some of these arbitrage opportunities are all on Ethereum layer 1, but then there are occasional opportunities like this one right here, another one. So this is one I already showed. Basically it's just basically going through all the different chains, seeing the different opportunities that exist. You see here's another one for Luna. So again, this one is all on the layer 1, but basically you can sort of get the general gist of it, that you can find all kinds of arbitrage opportunities by switching between different chains. And so this one looks at Ethereum, Polygon, and Binance Smart Chain. Now imagine a world in which you have, like Vitalik mentioned, you now have Arbitrum in here, you have Optimism in here. You can imagine there'll be even more arbitrage opportunities. So one thing I found interesting about this is that these arbitrage opportunities already also exist when you're looking at just Ethereum mainnet, right? So for example, like if you look at you look at this transaction, right, where you go from wrapped ETH to Tether to Luna, then back to wrapped ETH. These is all happening on the Ethereum mainnet layer 1, and these arbitrage opportunities still exist. So one thing I'm still trying to understand is why it's so much worse, or what's the difference between this happening on just the layer 1 versus it happening on, bridging between Ethereum layer 1 and something like Polygon or Binance Smart Chain. Now, due to the arbitrage opportunities and incentives of you profiting by switching between different chains, there's now an incentive that the people that are dominating block production on maybe, for example, Polygon, end up being the same people that are dominating on a network like Optimism. What can we do to solve this problem? he mentions a couple of technical things, which, to be very honest with you, I didn't understand in too great detail. But he mentioned things like PBS, proposer builder separation. These are basically anti-censorship channels and options available. And the idea is that, again, if you were to use the combination of all these things, where you do have centralized block producers, but there's different techniques you can use to sort of make sure that no one is sort of dominating the network. You'd still have centralized production, but decentralized validation. And then the other thing he mentions here too is how, what makes, so in addition to the incentives of having blocks on different chains, what makes somebody good, a good block producer, for example, Arbitrum, is going to be the same thing that will likely make them a good block producer on Polygon, et cetera, et cetera. And then the question now becomes, okay, what does this mean for the future of Ethereum? So again, now at this point, it's been well documented that Ethereum is taking a roll-up centric approach. So it essentially means that they're not necessarily trying to handle all future transactions happening on the blockchain. They're basically, they want to encourage other basically layers to basically operate on top of them. The other thing that they want to basically take is what I would call a neutral approach to this, basically meaning that they're not basically picking any winners. If the community decides that the best thing to do is like an optimistic roll up, if the best thing is a state transition channel, Ethereum is not trying to basically pick or choose or bet on any one technology. They're just trying to basically create an open platform that whatever technology ends up doing the best will be supported by the Ethereum network. Some more stuff here about basically big blockchains, etc., etc. And then the final thing I would basically says is that he mentions here that it's going to take a couple years for this to play out. He's sort of just basically painting the future. I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to set a vision for the rest of the community to work towards. And I think one thing about Vitalik you have to give him a lot of credit for is that he's very clairvoyant on this type of thing. So, for example, I referenced an essay he wrote in 2014 about staking. So recently in the community, we started talking a lot about proof of work versus proof of stake. Now in 2021, 2022. But Vitalik was already talking about this way back in 2014. So I think what he's sort of doing, he's sort of basically kind of giving some optimism, pun intended, for the future of the industry, and basically saying, look, these are the problems that we're currently facing. This is what the end will ultimately look like. I believe that the future is bright and it's possible for us to get towards that kind of future. He said, it does look increasingly clear how a realistic but bright future for scalable blockchains is likely to emerge. I love that kind of optimism.